Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this wonderful conversation with poet, professor, author, and scholar Sinan Antoon. We are featuring his new novel of Loss and Lavender, Notes from a Lost Country, which I'll introduce in just a moment. And we have with us Khaled Al-Hilli, who will be the main interlocutor today. And we are producing this program uh, by Jadaliya. And I would like to start by asking our colleagues, how are you? كيفكن?
ماشي الحال ماشي الحال.
Sinan, كيفك? How are you?
عايشين الحمد لله. كيفك انت؟
I don't know. I don't know. We're trying like everyone else. I'm trying to keep up with the bombs. But today we have another conversation that I am very glad that we're having because it will take us to a different angle, different corner. And let me start by introducing my co-host, who will be the main moderator today. And this is Khaled Al-Hilli, is a translator and scholar of contemporary Arabic literature and language. He holds a PhD in comparative literature from the CUNY Graduate Center and is a clinical professor at New York University. His research focuses on contemporary Iraqi and Arabic fiction, language pedagogy, Arabic poetics, and critical approaches to knowledge production in Arabic. Um, Khalid, we will have the entire bio on the Jadaliya post, so we will feature all your other accomplishments there. And I am very happy that we are doing this together. Thank you for joining us. And now let me introduce Sinan's fifth novel, Khuzama in Arabic, was published in Arabic by Manshurat al-Jamal in 2023 and has appeared in French and Persian and now in English, translated by the author himself, Sinan. It was released in the US last month as Of Loss and Lavender from other press, and in the UK from Saqi Books under the title Notes from a Lost Country. Now, Keith, how shall I introduce Sinan? Well, first and foremost, Sinan is a long time uh, brother and friend whom I have known for some 33 years. And it's very difficult to introduce him without saying that because I would be betraying how I am feeling. Sinan Antoon is a poet, novelist, translator, and scholar. His scholarly works include the Poetics of the Obscene, Ibn al-Hajjaj, and Sukhf from Palgrave-Macmillan in 2014, and a forthcoming book on the Iraqi poet Sargon Boulus. His essays in Arabic have appeared in major journals and publications in the Arab world. He writes a bi-weekly column for the London-based pan-Arab daily al-Quds al-Araby. His writings in English have appeared in The Guardian, The Nation, Journal of Palestine Studies, Journal of Arabic Literature, World Literature Today, and of course, Jadaliya, on which he serves as co-editor. Antoon has published two collections of poetry in Arabic and two in English. Most recently, Postcards from the Underworld from Seagull Books, 2023. He has published 5 novels in Arabic. Translations have appeared in 16 languages. His translations from the Arabic language include Mahmoud Darwish's In the Presence of Absence, which won the 2012 American Literary Translators Association, and Ibtisam Azam's novel, The Book of Disappearance, which was longlisted for the International Booker Prize in 2025. Sinan returned to his native Baghdad in 2003 as a member of InCounter Productions, where myself, and a few of our colleagues co-directed About Baghdad, a documentary about the lives of Iraqis in a post-Saddam occupied Iraq. He has He is co-founder and co-editor of Jadaliya and associate professor at New York University. I cut down his bio considerably so that we can get on with the program, but you will find both bios on Jadaliya's post. With this, I would like to say that I have witnessed Sinan's journey during the past 33 years, and I rarely see someone both as prolific, tender, productive, and brilliant. So I'll stop here so I don't divulge more, and I will hand the mic, so to speak, to Khaled, who will field most of the questions today. Khaled, ahlan wa sahlan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Bassam, for this wonderful introduction. And it's a pleasure to be here and to be in conversation with Sinan to discuss his wonderful new novel of Loss and Lavender. So, like you said, we'll start with a brief conversation, then we'll follow that with a reading of excerpts from the novel, and then we'll continue the discussion. So, without giving too much away, the novel follows two Iraqi characters, Omar and Sami, living in the United States. Their lives unfold side by side, each shaped in very different ways by war, exile, and memory. One of them bears the visible wound, the loss of an ear, the other by the gradual onset of dementia, each of them navigating a complex relationship with the past. So, my first question is I'd like to talk more about, maybe we could start talking about the characters first. So, as we move through the of Loss and Lavender, the characters feel both intimate and shaped by larger forces, by war, exile, memory. So I'm curious how you first came to imagine them, whether they emerged from a particular encounter or real life inspiration, whether they evolved in some unexpected way over the course of writing. So if you could talk about the characters and then the novel in general and how it came about.
Sure. Thank you so much, Khaled. It's lovely to be in conversation with you, of all people. So thank you for being here. And thank you, Bassam, for that lovely, warm, and poetic introduction. And actually, Bassam is involved in the first seed of the novel, in that when we were working as graduate students on the journal that Bassam founded, the Arab Studies Journal, which is now a peer-reviewed journal, we were going to a printer in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. to get a discount for our journal. And when we went there and were waiting to speak to the owner, I saw someone working in the press who visibly had no ear. And I told Bassam right away, that guy there is Iraqi. And he asked me, well, how do you know? So I told him I had just heard about the decree that was issued by the Iraqi regime to kind of stem the tide of people deserting the army. So that image just stayed with me because I thought about what kind of trauma this person had gone through and how he's navigating his life. And another earlier moment in my first few months in the US, and that's in the pre-digital age. I, like all immigrants, I had missed the language Arabic. I had not heard Arabic, not seen anything in Arabic, and I was in a pizza restaurant, and I heard one of the cooks speaking Arabic in the Iraqi dialect, and I was very moved. So I got up and went to talk to him, يعني بالعربي, but he responded by saying in English, he's like, "No, I don't know what you're talking about." And so that stayed with me. And then, of course, added to that, all the different ways in which newcomers to this country or any country navigate all what they have and their memory, and how do they navigate this country, and how that is always over-determined by and large by their class background, which influences the trajectory they have in this country. And in recent years, the debates in Iraq, as in other countries that go through the same experiences, are this problematic notion of the golden age that existed before. So before 2003 and after. So I just wanted to stage this confrontation or juxtapose experiences of a victim of dictatorship and a victim of the post 2003 regime, and also two antithetical ways of dealing with the memory of homeland. There are those immigrants who completely sever the past and decide to begin anew and even change their name and pretend to be someone else. And there are those who hold on. And that's what Sami and Omar represent.
That's wonderful. So it's been a long time in the making.
Yes.
And the way it came about is quite fascinating and interesting, because it's there's always the novel itself, as I mentioned earlier, it's structured around, it's layered. There's there seems to be a tension between remembering and forgetting, between holding on to the past and trying to escape it. But the way it came about, the transitions and the time shifts are quite smooth, and it's not something that you'd see a lot in novels that are structured like that. It's very smooth, the way you can immediately tell what timeline you're on. And I think I asked you this in a conversation before, but how did you come about organizing this, setting this up in the way that it came to be structured in a novel?
Well, that's a great question, and I mean, I've never been, from my first novel, I've never been interested in any kind of linear or organized, smooth narrative, specifically when it comes to memory, and specifically when it comes to the memory of characters and people who have suffered so much. And this is not how we retrieve memory. And as you said, there is always this dialectics between forgetting and remembering, and how we unconsciously always edit our memories and change them, actually. I don't never want to spoon feed the reader, but I don't want it to be completely and totally lost. But for especially for Sami, who is someone who starts to suffer from dementia, and I wanted to have the reader inhabit that. What would it mean? How would it be to live inside the loss and fragmentation that Sami is suffering? But I tried to have a balance, of course, of going back and forth between Sami and between Omar, and then there are all the songs. I mean, an easier, more traditional way was to have the chapters have the names of the characters so that you know who is remembering. But I always bank on the intelligence and the desire of the reader to figure things out for themselves. And there is something that Ilyas Khouri, our late friend and colleague, used to say about the music in the novel, in a way, finding that rhythm, which takes a lot of time and I think patience, and just figuring out what is the. So I shifted the order of a lot of chapters. I mean, the end, I always knew what the end would be, but I shifted the order of a lot of the chapters and the scenes until I got tired of changing and said, let's let it go, because I think it reads well. The songs also help in a way. But sometimes it's, sometimes it just, there's a gut feeling that I've reached the point where I think I can let it go.
Oh, wonderful! You mentioned the songs, and I've been saying this to a lot of friends about the novel, is that it contains a treasure of songs and poetry that have not been translated before. So if anyone's interested in reading these texts in English, I think that would be the first time to be able to do that. But that just the process of doing this. So you've and a lot of these songs act as triggers of memory in a way. But how did you come about the act of? I mean, I think the question is a bit too vague. But I want to talk about the translation of the songs and the poetry. Some of them are in dialect. I think that also poses an additional challenge to the translation task itself. And then the way you're using these sensory, auditory cues as triggers of memory.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think songs and poems and smells are themselves sites of memory. I mean, as I've been in this country since 1991, and sometimes I'm walking and all of a sudden I hum a tune or a song that I haven't remembered even in 30 years. But also, just as with the antithesis between the two characters, there are certain songs that Omar hears while he's working at a club, an Iraqi club in Detroit, that people are dancing to. But for him, it reminds him of a moment when he was in the army or when he was being tortured. With Sami, it's as I was doing the research for the novel, I discovered that a new treatment of patients of Alzheimer's and dementia is that actually, if they listen to songs that they really loved when they were young, that they can retrieve memories that seem to have been lost. But even in the previous novels, I've always tried to use sound in the way we experience and we think of songs as well. It was very difficult to translate, of course, because especially the songs by Yas Khudr, which feature heavily in the novel, because Sami, that was one of the favorite singers for Sami, and then Kulthum as well. I mean, Kulthum is a bit easier, but the Yas Khudr songs, a lot of them, all of them are in the dialect, and there are certain expressions that are very difficult to render in English. So they actually, one of the readers from Iraq, when she heard that I was translating the novel, right away said I would be curious to see how that works. But it's just also to bring home the way memory functions and how, of course, it's not just language, it's the senses, it's, as you said, all of the senses, but specifically sound and songs, and how those transcend time and space and shuttle someone back to a sweet or a bitter memory. And the dialects, of course, in the Arabic, there's the Yemeni dialect, the Syrian, and the Lebanese, and the Iraqi. These, of course, are difficult to render in English because they would be too disorienting. But I try always to keep a few phrases in the original Arabic to indicate how different they are.
Wonderful. You mentioned, and this is something I should have also opened with, is the fact that you actually translated the novel yourself, all the novel, not just including the dialogue and the and things that are meant to be said in English, things that are meant to be said in Arabic. How did you go about this complex task of rendering both dialect and sometimes even the English of somebody who just moved to the U.S., who's taking ESL classes? How did you? I imagine the original Arabic does not reflect any of that, but the English really works well with these different variations. So how did you come about this? Were there any challenges when you're rendering the one character's speech, like Omar's specifically, or?
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question, because as you said, I mean, just as some of the dialogues in the dialect cannot be rendered in English, but for example, Omar's English when he first comes to the US is broken and ungrammatical, and it takes him a long time. And in the Arabic, I did not indicate that except when there is a language or when he thinks about improving his English. But when I translate into English, it would have unrealistic for him to speak perfect English. So I had to imagine how he would speak English and have his English be broken and have some of these ungrammatical places. And the same thing for the other characters who are, who come from Mexico or from other parts. So that's why it was not a straightforward translation, because I had to, although one lives with one's characters, but to go back to the characters and to think how they would have said that. Which, yes, so, one of the editors had to ask, is this intended or was this a typo or something? But of course it was intended, because, I mean, simply it might be a cliche, but for me, these characters are real. And of course, I want them to be real for the reader in the original and in the translation as well.
And there's something I mentioned this to some of my students the other day about how the English of of Omar, for example, the way he speaks is sometimes it feels like an Arab thinking, because the grammatical structures are translated into English the way they would be spoken in Arabic, and it was quite interesting to see that, because a lot of times in translation this would be flattened.
Yes.
But even the mistakes that somebody who's thinking in Arabic would make in English.
No, exactly.
I think there was an Khalina. I forgot what the exact phrase that I was showing my
Let me
students the
buy
other day,
a
but it
car
was-
for
yeah.
سيارة بالأول or something. No,
Yeah,
yeah, that's very important. The syntax, not just the ungrammatical,
Yeah.
but also the word order and the syntax, which we, a lot of us still do, but definitely Arabic speakers do that. You can tell right away because the syntax has to be different and has to be, kept that way. So I'm happy that I remember in our first conversation you pointed that out. So yes.
Cool. Yeah, that was wonderful. And
Can I
I want to talk about.
can I interject just honestly to help share some of the feedback on the book and also to give you a break, Khaled. I would like to. I know Sinan might not like this, but I'd like to share some of the comments on the back of the book. Is that okay, Sinan?
والله يا عمي بعد انت وضميرك.
Okay, so here we go. The short byline is: in this achingly beautiful novel of trauma, memory, and identity, two Iraqi men struggle to start a new life in the United States after the Gulf War. And then, of course, there's a more of a description of the novel on the back of the book, of the cover, and there are a couple of comments on the back cover. One by Molly Crab Apple, author of Here Where We Live Is Our Country, and she quotes or she writes, ravishing, heartbreaking, and often absurd. Of Loss and Lavender is a novel on exile in all its meanings, panoramic in implications, but distilled down like a fine elixir. I adored it. And I do have to say that whenever Sinan writes a novel, and I've sort of lived with him through this journey from the first novel, I'jam, that he wrote, anything he writes actually has this combination of a number of dimensions that depict life, including the absurd and the sometimes the extreme and the beautiful. There's always beauty. There's always absurdity. There's always a sense of profound meaning. And I just wanted to say that this captures this two-liner captures this. Another is by Ken Chen, author of Juvenilia, an unexpectedly soulful novel that deepens the more you stay with it. The book's two protagonists are traumatized, walled off, and imperfect men, but one of Antoon's victories is how he makes us want to spend time with them, understand them, and even root them on. And finally, Hassan Abdelrazek, British Iraqi playwright and fellow of the Royal Society of Literature, with his gift for creating unforgettable layered characters, Antoon leaves readers with echoes that linger long after the final page. I just wanted to read those and share that these two books, or this book, is available from two sources, Saqi Books, and they are listed down here, saqibooks.com, where you can just go to Saqi Books and search for it. But the rest of the URL is here, book/Saqi Notes from a Lost Country, and then otherpress.com. With that, I will return it back, and I just realized that I was not on screen when I was reading those things, so it was me, and apologies for that. All yours, Khaled.
Thank you, Bassam. This is really. I'm reading also I was reading the text, and the mention of the exile and the space, and there are a couple of things that came up in these quotations. One of them is first of all, the title itself. If you can tell us a little about how the title moved, it had its own journey in a way, from Khuzama to the English. There are two versions, and so on. If you could tell us a little about that, and then. And then we can we'll talk about something else.
Yeah, sure. So The Arabic was Khuzama. I mean, it was a learning experience for me because Khuzama has a certain connotation in Arabic. And when I was talking to my agent about translating it, and she said that lavender in English would just sound a bit too flat and would not have the same resonance that Khuzama has. And at first, I'm very protective of my titles, but then after thinking about that, I realized that it is kind of true in a way. So we had to come up with an English title that would, convey what the novel is about, and still preserve the Khuzama. So the choice was of Loss and Lavender for the US version. Now, when we with the UK publisher, it was also another interesting learning experience for me. They were saying that in a way, lavender in the UK has a kind of a different connotation. Of, I don't know, old people and cottages and things things like that. So their suggestion was this title, Notes from a Lost Country, and Notes would speak both to lavender and to the music, because music plays such an important role in the song, specifically for Sami, because at the end that's the only thing that connects him to his past and to Iraq is the songs that he can still recognize. And when he listens to them, he relives those beautiful moments before having to leave the country and so on and so forth. So it might be confusing because a friend told me, what, did you publish two books at the same time? And I said, no, it's the same novel, but it has two different titles, depending on which side of the pond you are. But I think it's, yeah. Interestingly, also, unfortunately, I mean, Khuzama, unfortunately, nowadays in the Arab world, a lot of people use lavender for Khuzama. It doesn't have to be unfortunate, because that's in a way the more, the older word for it. I'm trying to keep the answers short and sweet.
And I understand it was also translated to other languages before English, right? It was
yes. That's a very good point. Thanks. For Persian, it was just Khuzama, because they have that in Persian. In French, it was like the scent of lavender. It's interesting. It's a good, even in France, they said lavender by itself would not work. And I think it just came out last month in Malayalam in India, and they used of loss and lavender in Malayalam. Let's see what the other translate.
So it didn't have the same association in these languages, I guess, the lavender itself.
Except in Persian.
Oh, in Persian, it does not have that. Does not have the same association.
I think I trust the translator Muhammad Hazbai, and he said it it has the same resonance that he felt in Arabic that it would be in Persian. It doesn't have all of these other complications in meaning that we have in the US or in the UK for whatever reason. So Khuzama is still Khuzama in Persian.
I also want to talk about place in the novel. The space, the geography of the novel extends throughout different continents. It starts in Iraq, and there are other places, but even within the U.S., there are different spaces. There's some of the events happen in Brooklyn, some in New Jersey, and other places, and there are encounters with different immigrant communities, and even Arab communities that have different dialects that you also portray quite accurately, like the Lebanese and the Yemenis and so on. So my question is, there's throughout these different geographies, there's a relationship that the character has to space that's always kind of tense. The characters are not always at uh, they're not always at ease in their own in a space that's outside of Iraq. And even within Iraq, there's a sense that for Omar it was a very different experience than Sami in how he. I don't want to give too much away, but he was also trying to avoid getting arrested and so on. So, how did you think of the relationship of the character to the space that they inhabit?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, what we will start with Iraq. I mean, in this, as I said before, this ongoing chaotic debate about different periods of Iraq tends to be so binary and so polarized. And so I think through the characters, I simply wanted to render the experience whereby, of course, there were victims in every period, but also someone from a poor working class background who didn't go to college in Baghdad and had to go to the military, their experience, and then to be physically scarred. Their experience of Iraq and life in Iraq would be completely different from an upper middle class surgeon whose economic background enabled him to navigate life in Iraq and dictatorship in all of its complexities with relative ease, to kind of ward off a lot of the negative aspects of life there. But also in coming to the US, needless to say, of course, we have this master narrative of the immigrant experience, which is usually linear and ends up with like the accomplishments of the American dream or iterations or versions of that American dream. But of course, oftentimes it's the American nightmare, but also specifically for someone like Omar who lands in Detroit, where there's a large Arab American and Iraqi American community, but a lot of them, of course, come from different periods and have this
interviewing
nostalgic view, unrealistic view of Iraq, what Iraq was, and they cannot understand where he's coming from, and he feels alienated. So that's why he decides to leave Detroit to Jersey, where there are neither Arabs nor Muslims, to use his words. To also, in order not to be constantly interpolated as Iraqi and then and Muslim and be associated with all of the stereotypes. So he, decides to be Puerto Rican, which is his way of completely severing all ties to this traumatic memory and not having always to explain where he's from and all of that. But of course, that spells new complications. But then the contrast also between what it means to live on a farm in New Jersey and you interact with a certain set of Americans of certain backgrounds. And then, of course, Sami, whose class privilege allowed him to send his son to study in the US, and the son is in Brooklyn. And of course, Brooklyn, New York is a different United States from the one in New Jersey. So it's all this intertwining and clashes of class, not only class back in Iraq, and how class privilege continues to overdetermine, by and large, one's life after arriving in the US. And then the different levels of, as you said, you put it so well, of unease, continued alienation for different reasons. And the irony of course, Omar wanting to be as far away as possible from Iraq. And then Sami, the novel opens with Sami, and I'm not giving anything away, where Sami wakes up in his son's apartment in Brooklyn, but the dementia is already beginning. So he cannot understand why he's in Brooklyn. And he goes out and walks down the street, and he's shocked that the signs are in English and people are speaking English. And he only feels a sense of at home in a way when he hears the two Yemenis who work at a bodega speaking Arabic. And then they ask him, where do you want to go? And he said, I want to go to Baghdad. So that says so much in a way about the dilemma of wanting to go back to a place one cannot go back to, and losing memory. And memory is everything in a way. And once one loses memory, one's loses one's sense of self. And then on the other hand, for Omar, it's very difficult to fabricate a new past and a new memory, and it continues to haunt you.
If I may ask, Sinan, as someone who is, very close to you on like a daily basis for, I guess, decades, I see you do a lot of research when you before you write a novel, and of course sometimes during and so on. Can you tell us a little bit more about this process, and
Sure.
maybe also talk about other novels that you had to do research for, and which ones have actually taken up a lot of your time to do research? Because not all, I understand, take up the same amount of time. I'd love to know that aspect of the writing process.
No, thanks. Great question. I mean, for Sami's dementia, I had to do a lot of research, and because there are different types of dementia, and they have different symptoms. And what worked well for me is that this type of dementia that he has, Lewy body dementia, patients have visual hallucinations. They see things that no one else sees. But just to have the character be believable and be multidimensional, so I had to do a lot of research on dementia. But also, Omar leaves Detroit, where he was working as a night filler and then a dishwasher, to New Jersey to work on a goat farm. So I had to do a lot of research on goat farms and go visit goat farms in New Jersey, and just also do research as to what's the daily routine. Well, before that, what is it like to be a dishwasher? What's involved in that? But also, what's the daily routine for someone who has to tend to goats? I mean, in all of these novels, the previous novels require research, but of course, I think the Wahdaha Shajarat al-Rumman, known in English as the corpse washer, which deals with
Yeah,
a
I wanted to interject and say that when you were doing research on the corpse washer, it was very depressing to speak with you, because you were always doing research on the process, and you would share some of the research, and it was, that was, I mean, that's what motivated me to ask, because I saw you do endless research to get it right, to get all of the movements and all of the procedure and the rituals right for the corpse washer.
Yeah, no, that was tough, because I mean, there's another challenge for those of us who left Iraq many, many years ago, is that, um, how to write about a place. What the most rewarding thing to me is when I hear from Iraqi readers that, who perhaps don't know about the biography, is that we didn't know that you left Iraq. Or when I got a question a couple of times, is like, how long did you work for as a corpse washer? So, so that's the reward for doing all of that. And I joke and say, if I get fired, then maybe I can go and do corpse washing somewhere. Who knows?
I was also thinking when I was reading it, I thought, did Sinan ever work on a goat farm? I didn't know, because it sounded, to me at least, it sounded quite credible. And I also, to attest to the research, there is actually a Yemeni deli still on Fifth Avenue and St. Mark's Avenue in Brooklyn. So that holds. So that's a good sign.
Oh, and by the way, it's an amazing thing that I discovered in doing research for the novel. I mean, I know Brooklyn and all of that, but like for describing the trees, there is a website that lists every single tree in New York, what type of tree it is, and where is it located. So, and then with the blogs that these people who work on goat farms, they tell you everything they do and the challenges, and record everything. So it helps a lot.
No, that's fascinating. Should we break for listen to an excerpt from the novel?
Sure. I'm going to read an excerpt that talks about Sami's mental state after the symptoms become very clear. In the last 2 years, his head no longer resembled a boat with a hole. It was more like an old abandoned house. Its rooms are barren, walkways dark since windows had grown tired and shut their eyes, except for one small room from whose ceiling a light is dangling. Every now and then it wakes up from its slumber for no reason, as if it had just remembered what it was. It sends out a flickering light for a few seconds, revealing the room's walls as well as the chaos of scattered objects on the floor. The light pants and mumbles before reverting to its silent darkness, and the instance is forgotten. The room has two windows, one broken, the other open. Both are too tired to stop the moody wind from wreaking havoc. Sometimes it whispers, but it blows, whistles, and howls at other times. It gets so irate sometimes that it pushes aside all the furniture and objects standing in its way. In the corner of this small, dark room, a terrified, lost man is squatting, a man whose head has become an old, abandoned house. Another short excerpt, he sees, this is about the visual hallucinations that dementia patients have. He sees children hiding like birds in tree branches. At night, they descend and sneak into his room through the window. Each is carrying a musical instrument, violin, flute, and cello. They take their positions and play lovely classical pieces by composers he doesn't recognize. But he knows he's heard them before somewhere. Amazed by their talent, he smiles. He feels safe and serene and wishes he could have played like them when he was a child, or to join them now and play along. But he doesn't know how. He listens in bliss, moving his fingers in the air as if playing the void. When they stop, he applauds enthusiastically and yells, "Bravo!" But they neither see nor hear him. Are they playing just for him or to other people he couldn't see? When they grow tired, they sleep on the floor, hugging their instruments or using them as pillows. He reaches and touches the hair of one of them, but can't feel anything. His hand runs through his hair and body, but he doesn't move or wake up. Are they made of music? He told Saad, his son, about them, asking him to come into the room to see for himself. But he said he didn't see anyone. Maybe you're dreaming. No, I'm not. I see them just as I see you here right now.
Thank you, Sinan. That was really, I've always thought my favorite novelists are the poets, because it really comes out in the way you write your you create your characters, you create the dialogue and everything. The language itself, there are parts of it that reminded me of Fihris, and I forgot the English translation of the. What was the translation of Fihris?
The Book of Collateral Damage.
Yeah, the Book of Collateral Damage. In the sense that they're parts that sounded very lyrical, very poetic, and then it demanded a different pace of reading, and then there were parts that were more structured. They were structured differently and required a different pace of reading. Was there something that when you're writing this novel, were there any? Did you have that in mind? Did you think of did it sort of pair up in your mind with another novel of yours that you've written before?
Yeah, I mean I always think that the narrative, of course, should tell us about the characters and move, so-called, it's a cliche, move the plot forward. But when I read novels, I want the language not just to transmit information. I want the language itself to make me stop and think of its beauty and all of that. So I always try to render that as much as possible. And I write in segments and scenes. So I focus a lot on that. And sometimes the subject of the novel or the themes or the character helps that. So that's why I spoke about this visual hallucination. So that allows me to unleash the poetic aspects. And with Fihris is the one where, even according to a couple of critics, a lot of the passages could have been standalone prose poems. But because the theme of the novel itself allows, it's all of these objects that are speaking about their lives and so on and so forth. So yeah, Fihris was in the back of my mind as I was writing this. But of course, there are places where it's about the mundane details of Umar. And it also depends on the character. I mean, not every character can think or speak in a poetic way. That's something that one has to be mindful of, right? So Faris, Namir is a professor and all of that, but Wadud in Baghdad is the one who's more poetic in a way because of the way he's thinking about everything and because of all of that. So that's, I mean, Faris is always in the back of my mind as something to kind of to replicate the poetry in a lot of the segment where it fits the narrative and the novel without being excessive.
Yeah, you spoke about Sami, but I also want to talk about Umar a little because Umar's there's so much. There's something about his about memory and how it sort of dictates maybe the traumatic memory, and it dictates how he acts in the present and how it affects his relations, and even memory seems to be so embodied in a sense that even like the ear itself is a memory that he's trying to forget by really trying hard to find a way to see a doctor and so on without giving too much away. But for him, memory, if you can talk a little bit about how Umar and how memory is really the memory of somebody in Umar's place as well, because there are a lot of Umars out there whose memory seems to dictate how they it becomes almost, I don't want to say deterministic, but there's a lot of like how he goes through relationships and so on. How does memory figure in his mind, in his mind and in his body as well?
I mean, yeah, that's a very good point. I mean, it's years ago when I was having an injury, and then the doctor said we just have to re-educate the muscle and work on muscle memory. And it just at the time, I mean, it's I guess it's a common term, but I was like, oh, muscles have memory as well. But with Umar and with anyone who is scarred physically by torture under dictatorship or during civil war, especially with Umar, because having the ear cut off as punishment. So imagine that sense of trauma and shame he felt to be in the public space, because so it's layered, because people will point out to him as being a freak, looking like a freak. It's also important to note that it would take a lot of money to have plastic surgery, but back then in Iraq, even the doctors who were willing to perform the surgery were punished. But he would not have been able to. But also the shame of that person is a deserter. So his whole desire about seeking asylum is to that once he has the plastic surgery to have another ear made out of the ribs attached. But as we know, in that even after the ear is restored, not the actual ear, but it's the body has already internalized, and his psyche has already internalized the years of shame and feeling inadequate and feeling that he's there is a gaze. And add to that the other layers of the gaze as the immigrant or a refugee coming from Iraq, and Iraq is associated with dictatorship and Saddam Hussein, and then after 9/11 it's he's a Muslim, he's interrogated by the FBI and all of that. But it just, not to dwell too much on trauma because it's become overused, but how the body itself remembers and unconsciously there are all these learned reactions, and how intimacy becomes very difficult for him, of course, because the way he feels about his own body and all of that. So it's, I mean, this is something that I'm interested in, even in like the kind of courses I teach about what are the qualities of memory, and what is the afterlife of war, how wars end for the victors, and there are victory parades. But for those who were victimized by war and by dictatorship, they carry the wounds with them. And I don't want to, essentialize these wounds and whatnot, but I've always been haunted by how years and decades later you meet people who still carry those wounds, and those wounds oftentimes influence how they deal with space, how they deal with people. Um, so there is no closure most of the time.
That's really fascinating. Now, the idea of you mentioned the closure, and I want to talk about that in a second. Uh, but what you're saying also lines up nicely with the idea, with the more a lot of there are a few people who've been talking about the idea of war literature and how it exceeds the moment of the war, and it has its afterlives and I think this is a very good book to show that this is not exactly. I mean, there are moments when there's the direct contact with the consequences of war, but a lot of it is carried throughout or across geographies and time and it's carried within the characters. But just to get to you said there's no closure, but it's one of the nicest endings to that I didn't expect at the end, and I don't want to say more about that. But how did you? Maybe that's more about the craft. A question about the craft itself, and how are you able to sort of make timelines overlap and meet in a way that was not really very, because these are very complicated. Like for me, when I was reading it, the thought in the back of my mind is that these are very different timelines, but there are ways in which they sort of overlap in a very surprising way. How does that work in the process of making or organizing the novel or putting it together as a
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, as I said before, also the way memory works and the way we remember is never really linear. It's already
Mm-hmm.
a collage, and we in one day you could go back 7 years and go forward and so on and so forth. So, but I write in segments. But there's something I learned from an interview with one of my favorite writers, Italo Calvino, the Italian writer, who said that he used to write different parts on index cards, and then that would help him in shuffling them to see how they would sound and how they would be. So that helps me a lot. um and I've, from the beginning, I was never really satisfied with these neat endings and these linear and crescendo and end. And this is where, the non-Western and Arabo-Islamic tradition and these concentric narratives and non-ends or circular endings that I'm drawn to novels or works of art or films that have these either open endings or circular endings. I'm not satisfied aesthetically, but I think in our discussion about war and the trauma of dictatorship, it also has a political significance that there are no endings in a way. All endings are artificial. And so the ending in the novel had to be an open end that leaves the reader with pressing questions that they would have to think about. And not that I intended it like that, but as I think of the novel as a reader, if it's read in the larger context of how people think of Iraq's different periods. And also, this is, of course, a discussion in a lot of societies about what to do with the victims and the victimizers of previous eras. How do we deal or think of or interrogate previous errors and the individuals who willingly or unwillingly were put in positions and then perpetrated violence against others. What to do with that? If we have time, because I feel guilty about, if we have time, there is a very short excerpt about Umar, which deals with this notion of memory that I'd like to read.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Umar didn't carry much with him, just one bag, a small one, compared to those hauled by other passengers on the plane. Unlike theirs, his wasn't stuffed and full, like a bloated stomach. He brought nothing from that distant place he wanted to be as far away from as possible. He took nothing from a country that took from him and didn't want to keep anything. All he wanted was to amputate it entirely from his memory, just as it had amputated a piece of him. His plan was to get rid of all the clothes he brought and buy new ones as soon as possible. Not even the bag that he had carried all the way from Baghdad to Amman and then was to be spared. The only thing he was going to keep was the tiny Quran his mother had given him when she bid him farewell. He didn't realize it at that moment, but he would discover later, time and again, that the head is a suitcase, and the heart as well. They both carry and hold what hundreds of suitcases cannot, and one cannot simply empty or dispose of what is inside.
No, this is beautiful, especially the bag, because I've also seen, the bag as a symbol of the memories that you keep with you. That's a very, it's really fascinating to see Omar's relation to that part of his life. Sinan, I'm really, this is one of my favorite novels this year, and I'm so glad that we could talk about this. And I'm very excited to see how people are gonna also see it, and Bassam's responses to it.
Thank you so much for these wonderful questions, and I'm so happy that we had to got to have this conversation, and so thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Thanks, Khaled. Thanks so much, Khaled. And Sinan, I don't know what to say. Every time you write a novel, and I know this has been out in Arabic for some time, but it's like a whole different world that emerges. And I'm one of those people who have been encouraged by you to use novels in my classroom, and I really hope that those of us who don't end up doing so, because in this kind of world that we are witnessing, I think sometimes fiction can be a much more formidable lesson and guidance of sorts. So in all cases, Sinan, Anna, I'm very happy that you joined us today, and I hope that you never stop writing. I will show the URL for where to buy the book next, before as we say goodbye, and people can just take it down, and there will be links in the Jadaliya post that will be published very shortly. Shukran to both of you, and I will continue reading, Sinan.
Thank you, Habibi Bassam. Thank you.
Thank you
for hosting.
Thank you, Sinan.
Take care, everybody.